I married a man 25 years older for his money. After his funeral, his lawyer handed me a sealed box and said, "He made sure you got exactly what you deserved." The box was smaller than I expected. That detail matters. Hold it before anything else. I had spent 14 months as the wife of a very wealthy man, 14 months inside a life of marble countertops and private car services, and dinners at restaurants where the menu had no prices because the prices were not something the clientele was expected to think about. And after all of that, what his attorney handed me in the conference room on the 4th floor of Whitmore & Associates, 11 days after we buried Leonard Ashworth in the rain at Oakwood Cemetery, was a box the size of a shoebox. Cardboard, sealed with 2 strips of brown packing tape, my name written on the top in Leonard's handwriting, not Diana, not Mrs. Ashworth, my full name, Diana Marie Calloway. The attorney, a man named Robert Whitmore, 61 years old, 34 years in estate law, with the specific unhurried quality of someone who has sat across from grieving widows and calculating ones and has learned over decades to tell the difference, placed it on the table in front of me and said the sentence that I have been turning over in my mind every day since. "He wanted me to tell you," Robert said, "that he made sure you got exactly what you deserved." He said it without expression, not warmly, not coldly, the specific neutrality of someone delivering a message they were instructed to deliver, precisely as worded. I looked at the box. I looked at Robert Whitmore, and I felt something move through me that was not grief and was not guilt, and was not the particular calculation of a woman who has spent 14 months managing a marriage she entered for the wrong reasons. It was something older and more frightening than any of those things. It was the feeling of being seen completely by someone who is no longer there to tell you what they saw. I need to take you back to the beginning, because the box makes no sense without the woman who received it, and the woman who received it makes no sense without the 12 years that built her. My name is Diana Calloway. I am 39 years old. Was, at the time this story begins, a junior events coordinator at a hospitality management company in Chicago, which is a job title that means you are responsible for the logistical success of other people's important moments, while your own important moments accumulate in a waiting room with no visible exit. I want to be honest with you about who I was when I met Leonard Ashworth. I want to be honest because the dishonest version of this story is easier and also completely false, and I have spent enough of my life inside false versions of things to understand what they cost. I was 37 years old. I had been living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Wicker Park for 9 years. I had $14,200 in savings, $31,000 in student loan debt from a hospitality management degree that had produced the junior coordinator position, and the specific financial anxiety of someone who has been managing a gap between income and expenses for so long that the management has become indistinguishable from living. My mother, Patrice, is 63. She raised me alone in a suburb of Detroit after my father left when I was 4. Not dramatically, not with a confrontation, just with the gradual recession of a man who had decided that the life he had was not the life he wanted, and had exited it the way you exit a subscription you've stopped finding valuable. My mother worked 2 jobs for 11 years. She gave me everything she had and some things she didn't have. She was a woman who had learned that the world does not organize itself around your needs, and had tried to teach me the same lesson. And I had learned it, and learning it had made me someone who was very good at reading rooms, and very practiced at making herself useful, and very bad at believing that anything good would simply arrive without a strategy attached. I had a strategy when I met Leonard. I am not proud of it. I am being honest about it because I am trying to tell you the true version. The strategy was this. I was 37 years old. I was tired in a way that had become structural, and I had watched enough of my friends make the calculation. Not all of them, not most of them, but enough to understand that marrying someone significantly older and significantly wealthier than yourself was a decision that some women made deliberately, and that the world judged harshly, and that produced in practice a range of outcomes that the judgment didn't account for. I was not going to marry the first wealthy older man I encountered. I was not mercenary in the cinematic sense. I was practical in the way of someone who has been managing a gap for so long that closing the gap has started to feel like the primary objective. Leonard Ashworth was 62 when I met him at a fundraiser I was coordinating for a children's hospital. He was a retired civil engineer who had made his real money not in engineering, but in the infrastructure consulting firm he had built after retiring, which had grown, across 12 years, into a company with contracts across 6 states, and a valuation that had produced, when he sold his majority stake 4 years before I met him, a personal payout of approximately $47 million. And he was not glamorous. He was not the romantic lead of any story. He was a quiet man with a slight stoop and reading glasses. He was always misplacing, and a tendency to say exactly what he thought in the specific way of people who have passed the age at which they feel obligated to manage other people's comfort with their honesty. He looked at me across the fundraiser room on a November evening and said, "You're the one who organized this." "Yes," I said. "The sight lines are wrong," he said. "The podium is blocking the view from the left third of the room. They won't be able to see the screen during the presentation." I looked at the podium. He was correct. "I'll move it." I said. Don't bother now, he said. It's too late. Fix it next time. He handed me his card, not in a romantic way, in the way of someone who has identified a competent person and wants to have access to that competence in the future. I have 3 events a year, he said. The coordinator I've been using retired. Call me if you're interested. I called him the following Monday. I want to be precise about the timeline of what followed because I have examined it many times from many angles, and I think the precision is necessary. I started coordinating Leonard's events in December. We worked together professionally for 6 months. During those 6 months, I encountered a man who was nothing like what I had constructed in my strategy, not because he was worse, but because he was more complicated, more particular, more genuinely himself than the category I had placed him in could accommodate. He was funny in the dry, specific way of someone who has stopped performing for audiences. He read constantly and argued with books in the margins the way other people argue with the television. He had strong opinions about infrastructure that he expressed with the enthusiasm of someone who has not stopped finding their subject interesting after 40 years. He called his daughter Clara in Portland every Sunday evening, long calls, and I could hear from the quality of his voice on those calls something I had not expected to find, the particular warmth of a man who knew how to love people and had been doing it consistently for a long time. I adjusted my strategy, not immediately. Over about 3 months, the adjustment happened in the way adjustments happen when you are trying to hold on to a plan, and the reality you are inside keeps presenting evidence that the plan was built on the wrong information. By June, I had stopped having a strategy and had started having feelings, which was not what I had intended and which produced its own specific terror in me, because feelings were not something I had budgeted for, and I did not know what to do with them inside the transaction I had constructed. Leonard asked me to dinner in July, not as a client. He said so explicitly, in the direct way he said everything. I'm asking you to dinner, not as an event coordinator. You can say no without it affecting the working arrangement. I said yes. We were married 14 months later. I want to tell you what the marriage was, because I have said I was honest, and honesty requires this. It was not what I had planned. What I had planned was a comfortable arrangement, warmth, reasonable affection, the specific mutual usefulness of 2 people who understand what they are to each other and find the understanding sufficient. What I had planned did not account for the possibility that Leonard Ashworth, 62 years old, quiet and particular and funny in his dry way, would turn out to be the most genuinely kind person I had ever been in a room with. He saw me clearly from the beginning. I understand this now in a way I only partially understood then. He was a man who had spent 40 years reading rooms, not in the hospitality sense, but in the engineering sense, the sense of someone who looks at a structure and immediately identifies where the load is going and whether the load-bearing elements are adequate. He looked at me, and he saw the gap I was managing and the strategy I had built around it and the exhaustion underneath both. He married me anyway, not because he didn't see it, because he saw something else too. You moved the podium, he said once in our 2nd year of marriage, referring back to the fundraiser where we met, after the event was over and the guests had left. I went back for my coat and you were moving the podium to the right position for next time. Nobody asked you to, nobody was going to know. I remembered doing it. That's the thing about you, he said. You do the work even when nobody's watching. I did not know what to say to that. I know why you married me, he said. It was a quiet evening. He said it without accusation. I want you to know that I know. I felt the specific cold of someone whose calculation has been named by the person it was calculated on. Leonard, let me finish, he said. I know why you married me. I also know that it changed. I watched it change. And I want you to know that both things are real. The first reason and the thing it changed into. And I don't need you to apologize for either of them. I sat with that for a long time. Why did you marry me? I said, knowing. He smiled, the real one. Because you move the podium when nobody's watching, he said, and because you laughed at my infrastructure jokes, and most people don't. I married Leonard for his money. I loved him before the first year was over. He knew both things. He kept both things. Leonard was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in our 2nd year of marriage. Stage 3, moving toward 4. The specific diagnosis that arrives not as a sentence, but as a timeline. He had 11 months after the diagnosis. I want to describe those 11 months with the care they deserve, because they are the part of this story that I am most protective of and most honest about simultaneously. I did not leave. I want to say that plainly. I did not calculate whether staying was in my financial interest versus going. The calculation I had brought into the marriage had been replaced by the specific, uncalculating reality of sitting beside a person you love while they become smaller and then still smaller. I drove him to treatment every week. I managed his medications with the specific systems of someone who works in logistics and has applied those skills to the most important project of her life. I called Clara in Portland, his daughter, every Sunday, not instead of Leonard but alongside him, the 3 of us on the phone together, and then, in the final weeks, me calling Clara separately to tell her what the week had been. Clara came in the final month. She stayed until the end. She was there when Leonard died on a Tuesday morning in March. The specific, quiet exit of a man who had done his dying the way he had done everything, without drama, on his own terms, in his own bed with the people he loved in the room. Clara and I held each other in the hallway afterward for a long time. She is 41. She had been wary of me when Leonard and I married, wary in the specific way of an adult child watching a parent remarry, the legitimate and loving wariness of someone trying to protect a person they cannot bear to see hurt. She had watched the marriage from Portland with careful attention for 2 years. In the hallway outside Leonard's bedroom, she said, "He was right about you." I didn't ask her what she meant. I knew what she meant. Robert Whitmore's office was on the 4th floor of a building in the Loop, with the clean, undecorated quality of someone who considers his work product sufficient and does not need the office to communicate anything additional. He had asked me to come alone. Clara knew I was coming. She had offered to accompany me. I said no, not because I was hiding anything from her, but because I understood, with some instinct I cannot fully explain, that whatever was in the box was something I needed to receive alone before I received it with anyone else. I sat across from Robert Whitmore, and he placed the box on the table and said what he said. He made sure you got exactly what you deserved. I looked at the box for a moment. Then I opened it. Inside were 4 things. The first was a handwritten letter. Leonard's handwriting. The careful, left-leaning script of someone who had learned penmanship in an era that took it seriously. I will not reproduce the letter here because it is mine and private, and some things should remain that way. What I will tell you is that it was 4 pages long, and that I read it twice in Robert's office without fully absorbing it, and twice more in my car in the parking garage below, and that I sat in that car for 45 minutes before I was able to drive. The second was a document, a trust document, the Leonard Ashworth Family Trust, amended 14 months after our wedding, which was to say, amended approximately 4 months into our marriage. The amendment restructured the trust's primary beneficiary. The original trust had divided Leonard's estate equally between Clara and a charitable foundation he had supported for 20 years. The amendment added a third beneficiary, me, 1/3 of the Leonard Ashworth Family Trust. The trust's current value, per the attached financial summary prepared by Robert's office, $31,400,000. 1/3, approximately $10,167,000. I read that number 4 times. The third item was a smaller envelope, sealed, with Clara's name on it. A letter from Leonard to his daughter, which Robert had already provided a copy of to Clara the previous day, and which Leonard had instructed Robert to include in my box so that I would know Clara had received it. The letter, Clara had told me when she called that morning, explained his decision to amend the trust and asked for her understanding, and told her what he had seen in me over 14 months that had made him certain the amendment was right. Clara had called me before I went to Robert's office. She said, "I read the letter." "Okay," I said. "He was right," she said, "about what he saw." I couldn't speak for a moment. "Okay," I said. The 4th item. I almost missed it. It was at the bottom of the box, beneath the letter and the document and Clara's envelope, a small thing wrapped in tissue paper. I unwrapped it. It was a photograph, taken at an event. Not one of Leonard's events, not a formal occasion, but a small community fundraiser I had coordinated 18 months into our marriage, a neighborhood thing. Modest budget, important to the people it served. Leonard had come. He had stood at the back and watched me work. The photograph was of me, after the event, after the guests had left, moving the podium to the correct position for next time. He had been watching. He had had someone take the photograph. He had kept it in his desk for a year and put it in this box so that when I opened it, I would understand what it was he had seen and when he had known. The woman in the photograph does not know she is being watched. She is tired. You can see the specific tiredness of someone at the end of a long day, and she is moving the podium anyway, with the specific quiet competence of someone who does the work because the work needs doing. I married Leonard Ashworth for his money. He knew. He loved me anyway. He saw something in me that I had stopped being able to see in myself, and then he made sure I knew he had seen it. Robert Whitmore walked me through the estate process over the following 8 weeks, with the methodical patience of someone who has guided many people through grief-adjacent paperwork and understands that the paperwork and the grief are not separate processes. The trust was substantial and cleanly structured. Leonard had been organized in his financial life with the same precision he brought to infrastructure. He had known from the diagnosis that there would be a process, and he had made the process as clear and unambiguous as he could make it. My portion came to $10,467,000 after estate taxes and administrative fees transferred to an account in my name over the following 4 months. I left my job at the hospitality company. Not immediately, not dramatically. I gave 3 months' notice. I completed the events I had been contracted for. I trained the person who was replacing me with the same care I would have given any project. Then I left. Clara and I had dinner in Chicago the month after the estate closed. She had come from Portland, not for the estate. The estate was handled, just for dinner, for the specific purpose of 2 people who had loved the same man sitting across from each other and eating a meal. She brought a gift. Small, wrapped simply. Inside was a copy of the photograph from the box. "I thought you should have a version you can actually display," she said. "The original is yours, but I had a print made. It hangs now in the small office of the consulting firm I started 8 months after Leonard died. Event strategy, specifically for nonprofit organizations, the specific, unglamorous work of making sure that the events that raise money for important things are executed well enough to actually raise the money. I started it with a portion of the estate, structured it carefully, hired 2 people I trusted completely. The photograph is on the wall. My mother visited the office last month. She stood in front of the photograph for a long time. "Who took this?" she said. "Leonard," I said. She looked at it for another moment. "He saw you," she said. "Yes," I said. "I'm glad somebody did," she said. It was the most my mother had ever said about the inside of my life. It was enough. I think about Leonard every day. I want to be honest about that too. Not with grief exactly, not the acute kind. Not anymore, but with the specific ongoing awareness of someone who has been permanently changed by a person and lives inside the change. He made me someone who moves the podium even when nobody is watching, and then he showed me that somebody was watching. And those 2 things together are the most important things anyone has ever given me. I am doing the work. I intend to keep doing it, even when nobody is watching, especially then.